If you've been card making for a while, you might have some mini embossing folders. They could look like this or even smaller. So what the heck do you do with those? Can you actually get something out of those? Let me show you what I can do with them. And maybe you can take your embossing folders to a whole new level. Let's get crafting. Can you actually cover an entire A2 size card panel with your mini embossing folder? Yes, you can. So here I'm going to be bringing in my Spellbinders Platinum 6. Now, of course, you'd have to figure out what sandwich works for yours, but for mine, I'm using my A plate, my B platform top, a metal shim. This poor thing's been through the ringer. My cardstock that I've placed inside of my 2D embossing folder. Now, this embossing folder is an old one from Stampin' Up, but I'm sure if you have any mini embossing folders that as long as the pattern repeats itself, this will work. So I'm going to top that with a couple pieces of cardstock and then my cutting plate, and I'm going to run it through. As you can see here, it definitely leaves that gap because the embossing folder doesn't cover it. So what I'm going to do is match up that repeating pattern, and I am using the edge row of dots to match up top and bottom. And then I'm going to go ahead and run that through slightly differently. This time I'm going to turn it. See, it won't fit that way. So I'm going to turn it on its side, and I'm just going to run it through this direction. Now, depending on your particular embossing folder, it could leave a ridge. So if yours leaves a ridge for the edge of the embossing folder, then only run it through about halfway. Don't run it through all the way, and then back it out, and then you won't have the ridge. But we do have a perfectly embossed full-size A2 piece of cardstock. We can achieve partial embossing with smaller folders just as easily as we can with larger folders. Now here I have taken the top portion of my A2 card base or layer, and I've inserted it sideways into my embossing folder. And I'm going to go ahead and run that through with the exact same sandwich. Now all of the folders that I'm using at the beginning are all from Stampin' Up. So they're older. I wouldn't even know if they're still available. Now I'm going to go ahead and place the embossing folder slightly down. I'm going to leave a section that is not embossed because I want to use that for something else. You could leave that open for a sentiment if you wanted to stamp a sentiment, but I have something just a little bit different planned for this particular card. So having the whole card embossed is not really necessary. And we've got the results of this partially embossed panel. Have you tried out one of my embossing folder techniques in one of your cards? If you'd like to share it with me, I'll leave my P.O. box linked down below in the description box, and then I'll share one of your cards in a future video. And just like their full-size counterparts, you can use these mini die cut or mini embossing folders with your die cuts or your punches. You can create tags. This is a 2-inch punch as well as some tag dies that I've used. And we can go ahead and make a myriad of different things with these being embossed. Create your embossed elements just like you would with their full-size embossing folder counterparts. Run them through the embossing machine and you've got added texture in a mini size. Now, one of the great things about these is that they can be used traditionally with the smaller die cutting machines, the more portable ones for travel, like the brand new Spellbinders Scout, which has a 3.5-inch base as opposed to the 6-inch base that I use. Here I've just added some twine and created a bookmark. I can put them all together, punch a hole in them, and then I have an example of each of the types of embossing folders that I have. I can also use them to stack other elements to create beautiful focal points for the front of a card. The sky's the limit. Let's turn our partially embossed layer into a card. Now I'm going to use some pattern paper here. Here's my panel. And I'm going to be using this Sizzix die for the rosette. Now this is a fantastic 3D element and so easy. A lot of people have asked, how do I store my pattern paper? Well, this is it. This is actually a very old container that was for CDs, believe it or not. But I take my 12 by 12 pads and I cut them down into 6 by 6. I find them much more user-friendly that way, rather than having to dig out the big books of cardstocks. Now, I'm just trying to find something that is going to go with my green paper. I don't plan on inking up this paper at all, although you certainly could. So I'm just going to thumb through it. This is such an easy process for me. You could certainly do it by theme. I don't find it's necessary. It's really not that big, but I like this pattern, and I think that's going to be our winner. Now, at first glance, you might not think that any of these greens match, but just wait. It's going to be magical, I promise. So I'm going to make the rosette. I'm going to use that striped pattern. Honestly, I probably really wouldn't use it for much of anything else, but I really like the stripes. This is the die that's going to make the rosette. And in order to make a full-size rosette, you need to cut 3 of those panels. I'm also going to take out this little round one and this fancy circle one as well. And that's what's going to make the top and the bottom for the rosette. Now, if you're using striped paper, the biggest challenge here is to figure out which way you want your stripes. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my paper down using my 9.5-inch Tim Holtz shears, and I'm just very haphazardly cutting this into thirds. I'm not worried about whether or not the patterns are going to match up, and trust me, it's a little freeing. I know that in the example on the packaging, everything lines up beautifully, but in my world, that's not always the way it works. So I want to show you that when you throw caution to the wind, it still turns out great. Now somehow I managed to miss some of the footage, but I'm going to go ahead and heat up my glue gun. And all I have done is fan fold this. Now there is a shorter edge on the edge of each of the dies, and that's where I'm going to put my glue. And that's where I started with my fold. I folded that down, and then I just fan folded the rest of the 3 pieces. Now I'm going to put glue on that short edge, and I'm going to attach it to the long edge. Squeeze it together so that the glue grabs. And then I think I used my reverse tweezers to hang on to it after a minute or 2. But I'm just kind of rubbing it along to make sure that I have a good adhesion there for that particular piece. Now I'm going to do the same thing. The short edge gets lined up with the long edge. Now I want my glued edges to be fairly dry when I work on the next step. So I'm going to set that aside after I kind of pinch it together with my reverse tweezers so that it does dry. Now you'll see I have cut out a large and a small circle from Craft Cardstock and a white small circle. The white is for the base, so it doesn't matter. I just used all scraps for this. And then I stamped Marion Bright in the middle of the smaller one, added some of my Bearly Arts liquid glue, and attached it to the rosette center. Now, did I have to layer them up? No, but I did. A little extra dimension never hurt. Now for the final part of the rosette, I'm going to match the top to the bottom. So once again, I am putting glue on the short side and I'm going to attach it to the final long side of that 3rd piece as I fight with my glue bottle. Anyhow, so I'm going to go ahead and do that so that it makes a circle. And that's really all there is to the rosette. And wait till you see how easy this comes together. Let's let that dry. Fast forward and our edges are dried and I'm going to go ahead and put this rosette together. This is super simple. You're just going to stand it up on its edge and then fold all of the top into the bottom. That's it. That's all there is to it. Now I'm going to flip this over because I'm going to put my first blob of glue in the center of the rosette, and you're going to see that I kind of fight with this a little bit, but I made a mountain out of a molehill. I truly did. I'm just going to go ahead and add some hot glue, and that will set that much quicker than any regular liquid glue would. Now this really reminds me of a cupcake liner, in all fairness, but I'm just holding it long enough for the hot glue to cool off enough to hold that rosette together. Now I'm going to add some hot glue to the base, which is the little white circle, and then I'm just going to squish it on top of there. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I have a tendency of burning myself with hot glue, so I'm just using my acrylic block to hold that down. Now, look at the cool striped pattern. It's like a swirl. That's not something I planned. I just put it together. So even when you think something may not turn out perfectly, be surprised by the unexpected, because this came out much better than I ever could have imagined. Now I've just gone ahead and hot glued my sentiment to the top, and then that element is done. Let's finish up this card. So here I've brought out my FISKARS trimmer, and I'm just going to trim up my partially embossed panel. I'm cutting it down by 1/8 of an inch on all sides because I just want a very fine white border around this card panel. Before I put that trimmer away, I forgot that I need to cut a 1 inch by 4 inch piece of that other cardstock. It kind of reminds me of gingerbread, honestly. And that's all there is to that one, because I'm going to create a band. So that is 4 inches, and I'm going to layer that up with my rosette. Okay, I'm using Accent Opaque 100-pound cardstock for my card bases, and the green cardstock is Recollections 65-pound weight cardstock. It's very, very thin. I have gone ahead and cut that piece down to 1 inch, but I forgot that I need to cut it down by 4 inches as well. So that is going to create the band. I have left the unembossed portion towards the top of this card, and I'm just going to cover it up with a strip of patterned cardstock. I've also added some liquid glue just to the little circular portion of the rosette to finish that up, and of course using my acrylic block to hold it down. Moving on to the next card, I'm going to be using some Distress Oxide in Twisted Citron in this great new Sizzix Vault Collection die set called Wicked. And I'm going to color up my witch the same as the packaging. Now I'm just using scraps of white cardstock. Again, this is Recollections 65-pound cardstock, and I'm just going to cut enough of the white cardstock to be big enough for the die. And I'm just using a blending brush to go ahead and color that entire scrap of white cardstock with the Twisted Citron. This certainly doesn't have to be a beautiful blend, just slap some color on the cardstock and go. Now I wanted my sentiment to have some serious wow power to go on against the purple background. Now this is watercolor cardstock. Again, it's just a scrap, and well, my box is a scrap too. It's an old Amazon box and a piece of paper towel that is well loved. So this is Dylusions spray. Now this is a shimmer spray, and the color is called Fresh Lime. And I'm just coloring or just shaking it up to make sure that all of the mica on the bottom is well incorporated into the liquid so I get a great look. I don't care about the splatters. I actually really like it, and I'm going to incorporate it into the design. I've added a light misting of water, and I'm going to go ahead and heat that up. Now, if you are new to card making, I don't want you to freak out because the cardstock is curling up. As that card dries, it will start to flatten out, just as you see here. Don't be afraid to experiment. Here I'm using oops, I just hit the microphone, Distress Mica Stain in Specimen. This was from a Halloween release, and this time I'm not spraying. I've taken and shaken the bottle up really well, and then I've removed the nozzle, and I'm just doing some splatters. It might not look like much yet, but Specimen is really dark. It kind of reminds me of alligator skin. So this will go a long way. Now I'm using a water sprayer. This is just from Distress as well. And I'm going to get those colors moving. And I'm just going to let it run. It's kind of cool. I know it doesn't look like much. And you might say, oh, what are you doing? Has she lost her mind? No, trust me, I have not lost my mind. It's going to make a fabulous sentiment. Let's heat it up and dry it up. Now I'm going to be using the Wicked sentiment from Tim's latest release called Vault Gothic Portraits. And I love, love, love this die cut. It's very gothic. It really is cool. And I'm going to use it something other than Halloween. So here's my purple dotted background, and I'm using the same accent opaque 100-pound cardstock. And I'm going to go ahead and glue that onto my cardstock. Now you'll notice I did cut it down just a little bit. I enjoy a white border on my cards. If you don't, you can certainly leave it 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 or 5 by 7, whatever it is that you make your cards, you can leave it that way. You don't have to leave the white border. I just happen to enjoy it that way. With the size of the elements, I've decided to turn my card base from a top folding to a side folding card. And not the side folding card you're typically used to. I want it to be more portrait. So I have the little witch, and I have cut out the little mouse or rat that she's supposedly dangling by its tail. And I cut that out of gray cardstock. I didn't do anything else to it. It's such a tiny element. But what I did do was I took a very, very small tag die and I cut it out of the same paper that we did with Wicked, and I stamped it Have A. And since it's a little tiny tag, I wrapped the tag around the rat's tail, and I'm just going to let it dangle. I'm only gluing down the rat. I'm not gluing down that little tag. So it's going to be kind of free-flowing. Now there's the Wicked. I'm going to go ahead and, using my same glue, go ahead and glue that down as well. Now this whole video came about because a subscriber asked me what to do with her collection, seen right here, of mini embossing folders that are only 1 inch wide. Here's some of the other ones that I have as well. This is partial embossing done with a full-size rosette, our Wicked birthday card, and one last example of a shorter rosette with a partially embossed piece of cardstock. Now, do you have a favorite mini embossing folder or one that you haven't used? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, I'll see you real soon.